This conference
Okay.
will now be recorded.
And I can go ahead and take roll. So Connie is here. We don't see Pam at this moment. She might join us. We have Susanna Gladwin and Carol Johansson as guests. And then I'm Julia Decker. I'm planning manager.
And I'm Gail
Okay.
Hendrickson, Community Development Director.
Okay, so I will just let you know that we do not have the meeting minutes, the summary of the meeting of the last one for you at this time. We basically we're getting a little pressed for time here in the office, so you'll have meeting minutes for the last meeting and probably this meeting at your next meeting. So we're going to defer the minutes until probably December. So Connie, did you want to go ahead and ask if there's any public comment or input?
Oh, okay. All righty. So again, I'm Connie Moore, and so I live over in the Hamlet area, and which is just near Saddle Mountain and just off of Highway 53, and so would everybody else like to please introduce themselves? Like I'm thinking Carol and Susanna, are you able to open up your mics? Can you hear me? So Julia, I'm seeing both. I don't get to actually physically see Carol or Susanna, and so it's hard for me to know if they're hearing me.
Well, I tried to unmute everybody, and I see that Susanna and Carol are both muted. I don't have the ability apparently to unmute them, and so I cannot respond about whether or not they can hear us. I don't have any input from them. And if they don't have their cameras turned on, then you would not see them.
Right, right.
I do have the
Okay.
chat box here. If Carol
Oh,
or Susanna wants to use the chat box that's up over in the upper right-hand corner, they can let us know if they can hear us or if they're unable to communicate with us.
Let's see, sent to everyone. Oh, hear you. Okay, Carol just said can hear you just fine.
Okay, good.
Good. And let me see. Oh, and then Julia, you're much quicker with your my typing skills are not what they used to be. So thank you for sending out that message. I was
Okay.
to do that.
All right. Well, so and I have not heard from Susanna.
Just fine. Okay. Well, my only concern, and I guess that's another good reason, another thing with the introductions now is that Carol, for example, if this is your first time in one of these meetings, we're always happy to have additional input from guests, and so I'm just letting you know if there's a way for you to open up your microphone and speak with us. Let us know. Be sure and do that. That would be handy. Always love to hear from people. Also, so that's one thing, and is just so we can have your feedback. Are you able to speak when you're wanting to, Carol? And I'm looking at the chat box, Carol, if you want to respond.
Yes, the chat box is always available to everyone.
Let's see, I'm not seeing it. But if she had closed it, maybe she's opening it again. So that's the thing is that, so Gail and Julia, I'm used to having interactions. So, I mean, so I'm a little bit befuddled at the moment.
Well, that's okay. I
Okay.
think that since we don't have any public comment or input right at the moment, we could go ahead and take a look at the policies, and maybe that will generate some.
Okay.
So if we want to go ahead and look at goal 5, policy 1, and Connie, you said that you were working off of a document, a hard copy document.
Yeah, all I had was page 1 because I know sometimes we go through the additional ones, and just I guess just to be clear, it's just I've had to move cars twice and shuffle everything, and so I you know, some of my paperwork is not you know, is not the bestly organized right now. I hope to have everything back in order by next meeting. So,
Can I comment?
Oh,
oh
there's
yes,
Susanna.
yay, Susanna, good to hear from you. Go ahead.
I finally figured out how to do this.
Yay.
And I do have several comments because this is my comment time. I didn't go through the whole agenda like I usually try to do, and I'm kind of stuck on looking at it on my phone. I'm in a place without Wi-Fi to download the thing on my computer. So my comments are, it's just a housekeeping, and it's still showing want all for zoning to be F80, but it shows F38 or other things, but I believe all forestry is F80 now. But then on the other hand, this is for 20 years out, right? Can you answer that?
This is Julia. So
Yeah.
anyway, if you take a look at policy 1, I think one of the first things that we state is that we would delete some of the references, and because all of the timberlands at this time that are F anything are F80, F38, AF20 don't exist anymore. So those were staff recommendations. Those are just outdated. So we had just suggested deleting those references.
Oh, good. And then I would like to, because it is out a possibility of 20 years into the future, is and I didn't jot down the exact wording, but not to be dependent on the implementation of the Forest Practices Act to protect fish and wildlife. There's a couple of places, and one of the wording is quite strong about leaving it to the Forest Practices Act to do it. And there may become time in the future when the Forest Practices Act legislatively changes. And I just would like to see that wording change. I thought yesterday's countywide meeting, Robert Strickland put it well, that the advisory committee for the forest practices people in ODF are and the ODF people on who deal with it all have to are mandated to be more industrial and big forest owners. And so they have more seats than environmentalists or fish and wildlife people. And when that wording comes up, if it's all right, if I just interject, if we get to that point. And then the other question for today's meeting is that there's a lot of wildlife and fish that are covered for countywide, but are not in our area. Like, I don't think we have any white-tailed deer, and of course, no sturgeon and other wildlife. Are we to review the whole county, or are we just wanting to address our area? That would be
Nice
for you,
question.
Julie.
Thank you, Susanna. Nice questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
well, one of the things that I was going to suggest here was to ask you if you wanted to pull out specific goals or policies that you wanted to work on, and then sort of make note of the ones that you think are okay as is, and then just work on the few that you probably have some concerns about. So, I mean, Susanna is mentioning some of the concerns she has. I'm going to ask if Connie, if you have any of the policies that you particularly were concerned about, and if you thought that the rest of it might be okay. I know that there's kind of a lot in this section because we have got a lot of fish and wildlife. And Susanna is correct about not having much in the way of white-tailed deer habitat in this particular area, but it's okay for you to look at the whole county. You know, specifically when you get into the community plan for this area, or these two areas technically, then you'll want to drill down on it. But it's okay to look at the entire region, and the Columbia white-tailed habitat mostly is along the Columbia River and into the islands in the Columbia River. But there's actually habitat that would work for them clear up into Young's Bay and the Lewis and Clark area. It's just that they're not there. They've been displaced. But once upon a time, they probably were there. So anyway, sturgeon, right, you wouldn't have any sturgeon in this area, but you're certainly welcome to look at the other areas. You don't have to. You're not mandated to.
And I'm curious about one, and that's the elk problem in Warrenton. Is there any policy in place yet?
I'm probably better off letting Gail speak to that.
Yeah, so Susanna, there are no policies in place. Where we're at in that process is that the county and Gearhart, Warrenton, Seaside, and some state agencies and some nonprofits are working on pulling together a list of commitments that each agency or jurisdiction will take in their efforts to reduce the negative impact of human and elk interaction. And that document is called the Declaration of Cooperation. And it's going to be coming before the Board of Commissioners on January 5th at a work session. And then if they're good with everything that they see in terms of the county commitments in there, then we would bring it back probably January 27th for their approval.
Because one thing I noticed is that, and I think it was the Seaside group, and as I said, it's too awkward for me to have the whole thing like open all at the same time, is that to think about development areas that are not going to get impacted by wildlife, big game going into their gardens and all of that. And I think that's hopeless. I mean, Clatsop County interfaces because the population is a thin strip around game habitat. that big game is everywhere. I mean, Astoria is a laugh. If you don't have a super fence in your garden, you can't have yummy deer things that deer like. So I think that I don't know about trying to protect trying not to have development where they may interface is probably hopeless, but maybe we sometime can have a program to have fencing support, wildlife fences. And that's all my comment is.
Okay. So go ahead, Connie. I'm sorry.
I was going to just, she brought up some good points, and one of the things that that I'm thinking about is it kind of caught me by surprise that there's a big housing development going in on Clatsop Plains. So I was thinking about the wildlife and human interaction there, but also, for example, when I'm driving through on 202, I feel completely safe reducing my speed during these times of year when the elk and deer are very active, and I just reduce my speed way down and get through it at night without hitting anything. On 101, I think if I tried to drive 35 miles an hour, I think I would, be surrounded in protest. So I guess if I'm responding to Susanna correctly, I'm a little bit bugged sometimes by big developments, pulling in some of our open spaces. But when it comes to, we've got to have a thoroughfare, we've got to have a good, safe highway going up and down the coast. And if there was some more that could be done for that, I hit the elk in Clatsop Plains. So, it was right there. I just hit that bull elk right in the rear. And there were 2 or 3 of them right standing there looking at me. As like, and it's hard sometimes to even put your high beams on, if there's traffic coming the other way. So, I do that there's, for the highway, I think there's a safety issue.
And right there, of course, you have all the herds that are moving from the interior to Camp Rylea. I mean, they just move all through there. I think there should be motion sensor cameras that somehow trigger flashing lights on the highway saying, elk, we're moving, or something.
That would be good. Yeah, I was just, I didn't see the elk until didn't really have enough time to stop.
Yeah. And this time of year, they're all hormonal and crazed. And normally the deer and the elk generally don't get out on the highways too much. I feel fairly safe driving on 202 with all the elk around. But this time of year, they're crazed. They got something else on their mind than safety.
Yeah.
That's my comment. I'm done.
Right. And then my other part, kind of going along with something that Susanna brought up, is so I have 27 acres and mine's zoned. So I'm going to use this as an example. I'm looking at majority of the timberland F80. Now I'm not sure whether my area is zoned for ag. I thought mine was ag forest, but and I noticed that there is an AF20. What was the designation on the forest before? Was it always F80? And is that what we're reviewing now, or is it or was it a different number and we're proposing F80?
Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, back in the 60s and 70s, they had different zoning. And so there were smaller tracts, smaller forest land areas. And when the zoning ordinance was adopted on September 30th, 1980, they adopted several smaller AF and F zones. So there was an F38 with a 38 acre minimum, and also an AF10, or no, AF20 zone for 20 acre minimum for agriculture forestry. That changed on March 28th of 1997, when the county adopted an ordinance that picked up and was consistent with DLCD goals that changed all of those resource zones, the AF zone, the F80 zone. It deleted the F38 and the AF20 and moved those zones, as well as the EFU exclusive farm use zone, into 80 acre minimum lot sizes. So references to AF20 and F38 are obsolete. We don't have those zones anymore. They don't exist anymore. They did once upon a time, but they don't anymore. So staff is recommended to delete references to F38 and AF20. And
Okay.
so most of the county's forest land now is F80. And if you were to take a look at one of the large maps that shows the entire county with the zoning turned on, you'd see that we are well in excess of 75% forest land. So it looks like Gail's going to show you some zoning right now.
Okay,
so
good.
You can see what they did.
Okay. Also, so if you could review quickly what the minimum says, like for example, if like for example, I know I can't break mine up, and and I don't have any desire to break mine up. But if somebody wanted to break up their forest land, then they would need to have over 80 acres. Is that kind of an example of utilizing the F80?
The F80 is a resource zone for timber, and commercial timber harvest, basically production and harvest. In order to break it up, you would need 160 acres, because today we cannot create something that's less than 80 acres in size. So in order to divide something, your remnant is still going to have to be 80 acres. So you need at least 160 to get two parcels out of it. But that said, putting a dwelling or any non-forestry use in the F80 zone is at least a conditional use, and sometimes even one that requires a public hearing. So putting a dwelling on there, for example, is not an easy task. These lands really are reserved for forestry.
Okay, well, that's so how are I mean, that's what I have. I have a conditional use permit. And it wasn't easy. It was a little bit scary because I wasn't sure whether it was going to go through or not. That was my main thing. But again, I just tend to be nervous. So the change is, does it really affect the small, so the small land use owner like myself, 27 acres, 27 acres is still well below 38. So does that change to 80? Did that really affect the smaller land owners?
Well, it happened in 1997. So if you haven't noticed a change, I'm going to say probably not. What it did was it shifted everything going forward to an 80 acre minimum. It didn't mean that those smaller parcels went out of production or couldn't be used for timber or couldn't be used the way they were being used at the time. But it just means that going forward, they're trying to keep the larger tracts larger because larger tracts are better for resource production. That
Yes.
it's just
Yeah.
that. So all that staff is recommending in here, for the most part, is to delete the references to these zones that no longer exist. Just delete those references, and just anywhere where it's appropriate to retain a goal that as for forestry, just mention that it's F80 because that's what it is now. We're not changing anything about the use or anything like that. It's just to delete the old references.
Can I say something? Or partially in a
Sure.
question? Just the comment, one of the big reasons they did it is they felt that smaller forest tracts in woods would be much harder to defend in a fire, to fight fires, and they felt that having smaller forestry tracts would encourage more people in the woods at that time. I mean, there were probably other reasons, but that was a big reason. And the question is that I think that came down from state and not county, and therefore would be hard to change. Is that right?
The Department of Land Conservation and Development creates the overarching goals that the county needs to be consistent with. And so the F80 zoning, the 80-acre minimum, does come to us from the statewide land use goals. We need to be consistent with those. So in 1997, we went through the appropriate procedures to change the minimum lot size, and that was adopted by the board, and it went into effect on March 28th of 1997. The state did it, I think, a year or two earlier, and then all the counties follow suit, and it usually takes a year or two for everybody to finish their production of getting there.
Okay. Just I bring it up. It's really not relevant for today, but for population, for development, for higher population or whatever in Clatsop County, it's more relevant for that discussion. But if it's mandated by state, then we don't have a choice.
Right,
Well,
and
I'm
many of
certain.
those, oh, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I certainly, whatever it takes to protect our forests and increase, the having trees in trees that we can just enjoy and get the benefits from. And I'm not thinking in terms of timber dollars either. More in terms of carbon capture and that sort of thing. I'm for, sometimes I'm still getting familiar with the tools that help that sort of thing happen. So I'm not for trying to have smaller tracks. I was just maybe more thinking, for myself, with 27 acres, I'm thinking there's a bunch of other landowners out there that probably are, kind of in my same size range, and I'm just wanting to see how they fit in more than anything. But if 80 actually helps us with management of the forest, and the fire thing, I hadn't even thought about that, Susanna. That's great. Also, I noticed that when I've contacted timber cutters, or they've tried to contact me, for my size, most of it's going to go to them, and small tracks, it's hard to get much off of them, because of all the overhead required to just go in and cut them. So I don't have a concern with the 80.
Okay, so just so you understand, the 80-acre minimum lot size is settled. That's done. It's
Yeah.
long settled since 97.
Okay.
that's not up for discussion today. All staff was looking for was whether you would recommend to go ahead and delete references to smaller lot sizes that no longer exist. I might also throw in there a comment about the fact that the county does not have jurisdiction over the Forest Practices Act, which is mostly what guides the goals and policies for the Oregon Department of Forestry and timber cutting, timber harvest, and production. So the county doesn't have jurisdiction over that, but the county has the ability to use that as a guide when looking at, you know, how these forests are managed. So I just want to make sure you understand what you have the opportunity to comment on or to help guide. The Forest Practices Act is not something that we have authority over, and the 80-acre minimum lot size is done. So I'm just wondering if you want to take a look at the policies in front of you.
Can
and
you
see if
hear
there's-
me? Your sound cut out.
I can hear you, Susanna.
So anyway, I wanted to take a look at these goals and
Can you
policies.
hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
You're cutting in and out on audio.
I'm sorry, I don't know why that's happening.
Yeah, I know she's not cutting out on my side, Susanna. So but I don't know all the ins and outs of the
Okay.
of the network.
Bear with it. The reason I totally understand the Forest Practices Act, and it's legislated and, from out of Salem. It's a state mandated thing. I just, with time, hopefully it can change, or perhaps legally at some point in time, we can have stricter things, so that the Forest Practices Act is the baseline, but perhaps other localities could have an overlay of stricter restrictions, and perhaps someday that might be acceptable under the Forest Practices Act. And so if indeed this document goes out for 20 years, I would like wording put in there that Clatsop County would like more protection than the Forest Practices Act.
Okay,
The Forest
so
Practices Act
I'm
is the
sorry.
worst in the West of stream protection. Compared to Washington, I think Idaho and California, stream protection is far worse in Oregon under Forest Practices Act than what they have decided is needed to protect their streams and fish and everything.
Okay, so Gail has brought up a page that we've been using for issues to be addressed, and then maybe some proposed draft language. She filled in there the need for safety measures for traffic and elk interactions, especially on Highway 101. If you look above that, you'll see some language where other committees have already kind of addressed some of their concerns about the Forest Practices Act, and that they would like to see it go farther, knowing that we don't have the ability to legislate something that overrides it. I need to move this so I can see it. Hang on just a second. One of the committees responding to a staff comment about many zones other than resource zones include streams, wetlands, major or peripheral big game habitat, and other resources worthy of restoration and enhancement, and many landowners would like to undertake such projects. So there was a recommendation that the county should add language to Goal 5 that would allow for restoration and enhancement of fish and wildlife habitat to be added as permitted and conditional use in all zones. So that was something that people were looking at, and that would help the smaller landowners who want to take on projects on private
Great.
lands. And then another recommendation was to address a concern regarding standards regarding riparian and stream setbacks that are ambiguous, and rely on terms that are not well defined. And so then we were looking at language that could be added that says the county shall revise the stream and riparian setback language to align with the Oregon Forest Practices Act as defined in OAR 629, et cetera. And part of your packet includes a memo from Mike Sinnott, who's the assistant fish biologist for our area with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And he had suggested this as something that we could do that would include the ability for private landowners basically it would apply to all lands, and it would increase setbacks for some streams that maybe are not so protected now, and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife would be able to help us calculate stream volume and determine what setbacks should be, and would line all of our goals and policies and setbacks up with the Oregon Forest Practices Act. And I realize that what you're saying is that the Forest Practices Act doesn't go far enough, but in some cases it still exceeds what we have. So we were looking to at least align with it a little bit and maybe improve that. Perhaps you're asking for some sort of encouragement down the road that the legislature, if it comes up before the legislature to review the Forest Practices Act, that the county would encourage the review of stream setbacks and buffers with the eye toward increasing them. Perhaps, you know, just encouraging language like that or something like that. I don't know, I'm making it up as I go. Tell me what you think about that.
I like it though, you know, kind of
That sounds good. Me
aspirational
too.
language, and yes, that would be nice. Thank you.
You are
Yeah,
welcome.
yeah.
So some sort of aspirational language toward, you know, encouraging review, but it would come from the legislature as long as we understand that, I think.
Yeah, because I
Yes.
think I have an example on Hamlet Road that I'm not real. I mean, I think the people that are living there certainly are attempting to do, you know, a good job at what they're doing, but I'm not happy with the with a giant shop, industrial shop, you know, within 100 feet of the North Fork of the Nehalem. It's having been through 2 floods, it makes me nervous.
Oh, so Gail has brought up on the monitor the setbacks that Mike Sinnott was recommending regarding stream buffers and setbacks. So anyway, he did mention that the ODFW would help us figure out which whether stream size was large, medium, or small, and that would help us determine what's fish bearing and what's non-fish bearing. And so that would
And so
allow
are
us
these
to
his recommendations, the ones that you've got that you're showing?
Yes, those are Mr. Sinnott's recommendations.
And I would like to add to that, in that the upstream non-fish bearing, which is often the streams that dry up in the summertime, but they're running in the wintertime, that things happening to those would not increase sedimentation downstream that would impact the salmon and things. I noticed in one of the packets that the where they lay their nests, lay their eggs, or often,
Reds,
pardon me?
the salmon reds, their nests.
Yeah, it's red, I believe.
REDD, yes.
That it's upstream pretty much, and then upstream from that, you go into the non-year-round streams that can flush down a lot of sedimentation over gravel beds in the wintertime under winter rains.
So again,
Suzanne?
that's probably, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, how would you, what would be the solution for preventing sedimentation from a stream that is maybe active only in winter from flowing downstream? How would you?
That is that you, and this happens in the forest practices of Washington and California, that you don't spray over them so that
Yeah.
vegetation can stay living and keep soils in place, and that you can't log over them right up to them. It's basically, I think, mostly those two things: keeping equipment out of them and protect habitat, flora, plants and trees and things growing along them.
So in other words, maintain
And
setbacks to them even when they're not active.
Yes, they're not
Yeah.
active in the dry season, but they have heavy flow in the wintertime.
Sure.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and so as I'm looking at those setbacks, I don't know, maybe the solution is, I mean, as I think about my Hamlet Road example, is, maybe the zoning is the solution. And that land may have had some kind of a grandfather in clause or something. I don't know, but it's, when I think about it, I think, well, what about 300 feet? What about 500? It's, I think having industrial sites near some of our, major, I don't think of the North Fork of the Nehalem as being a stream. I mean, maybe it's considered that by county or state standards, but I mean, it flows in to, I'm assuming it flows into the Nehalem, but maybe I'm wrong on that. And I'm just thinking of the name of it, but it's, it's a big enough river that, and it's fish bearing. I hate to see, there's all kinds of crazy things that happens during floods. And I just really hate to see industrial um, sites near our streams, even with 100 feet setback.
Okay.
Yes, and the Nehalem is also, I believe, 100-foot setback.
Yeah.
I think the 100 feet is the greatest, but these things that I forgot you said recommended are still, I think, double than might be double than what is in the
Than what we
forest
have
practice.
right now. Okay.
This is Julia. If I could just maybe clarify something. So if somebody has a residential use on a property and they put in a shop building or something like that, we're going to be using the setbacks that are in the county's ordinance. And typically, we're going to find that's going to be a 50-foot setback to the top of the bank of the river or stream. It's a riparian setback. Typically, it's going to be 50 feet. So if you were to, on a river the size of the Nehalem, for example, say, okay, we're going to use the Oregon Forest Practices Act instead of the 50 feet that we've been using for the riparian setback. If we were going to adopt the Forest Practices Act standard on a river that size, we would in fact actually see that setback double to 100 feet. But right now it's 50.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and I'm going to point that out. It's different that because it's not being used, it's not that shop building being built as an accessory structure to a single family dwelling. That's not covered under the Forest Practices Act, so they don't have to use the Forest Practices Act setbacks. They're using the residential setbacks in the county's land use code. That is the part that we have control over. So if we were to go with the Forest Practices Act at that example that Connie's providing, you would in fact end up with a larger setback. Now, that isn't going to guarantee that it's going to work in every situation, because people can obtain variances if they can demonstrate some very, very complex standards are met, including that they do not have reasonable use of the land without getting the variance. But they have to go through that process to demonstrate the need for the variance in order to get a setback variance. So the Forest Practices Act in that particular situation would in fact provide greater protection for those rivers and streams.
Oh, that's my big example for is this shop. And like I say, it's very clean and everything, but there's like a bunch of old cars that have I haven't looked at it lately that were parked there one time when I happened to look as I drove by, and you know, and cars leak and you know, I just feel that, you know, having a personal shop, you know, but this thing's giant. Giant, I think, in my opinion, for what is, you know, a personal shop. And like I say, there were a whole bunch of, you know, I think he's running a business out of it. And it just doesn't feel appropriate for the Hamlet Road area.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that he did anything illegal. I'm concerned about zoning and, you know, what we can do to prevent these kinds of things moving forward.
And I echo your concerns, Connie.
Yeah. I mean, just I took some pictures and have them on my phone of the North Fork being fairly active this last winter, and you know, and it wasn't even a flood year, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, like I say, I've watched what floods do.
Sure.
All the FEMA flood level stuff that's for houses, is that also true for all outbuildings?
FEMA
Yeah.
flood. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, so any outbuilding that's less than 200 square feet still needs permitting, and there are reduced requirements, but anything bigger than 200 square feet has to meet the full FEMA floodplain ordinance.
Yeah, and I'm not good at visually telling how big this thing is. It's I'm sure it's bigger than 200 square feet. So,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
maybe they've done some things that I can't see, but it's just, you know, they're it, you know, it again, having been in floods that where you didn't even, you know, I mean, some crazy things happened like in 1996 up in the Nehalem Valley area that, you know, that it, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, that not knowing what the climate's going to do over time, you know, I've places in the Nehalem Valley that you would have never imagined to flooded. And, you know, and if this shop flooded, then I think it would contaminate the river.
Well, I remember that the bridge at Shonima went out in '96. That was sort of an extraordinary event. So yeah, '96 was kind of a benchmark year in so many ways. So I
Yeah, I
don't know.
lived in this. So
I
that's
don't
how
know that
come
we're
I
going
know
to.
this.
Yeah, I don't know that changing the zoning is going to change. That's not actually what we're working on here. So
Okay.
if I could bring it
Yeah.
back, you're about, well, you're a little bit after 11 o'clock, and I wondered if you wanted to actually take a look at the policies regarding habitat that we're looking at in Goal 5. There's also some specific policies to the Seaside Rural Community Plan, and also one that's specific to the Elsie-Jewell Plan. And I wondered if you kind of want to take a look at those and maybe focus in on those a little bit with your time.
Oh, thank you. That, redirect me anytime you want to. I was just kind of going with the discussion. My apologies.
Oh, no worries. I just because you got some good discussion and you've got some ideas that came out of that, but I just wondered if you want to focus in on this a little bit.
Well, before we do that, I would be happy to say let's remove because I think it's confusing. Back to your original recommendation, I'd be happy to say remove the antiquated because I think that was something you wanted us to comment on. You were recommending that we remove delete the references to F38 and AF20. And I think that makes total sense. Otherwise, people get confused.
Okay, so you would agree with the staff recommendation on that, on policy 1?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And I think that we had pretty much the same thing on policy 2. Was if there was anything, I'm looking really fast at policy 3. Policy 3 had to do with the Forest Practices Act. And so that is part of that discussion we just had about maybe realigning the code to be more in alignment with the Forest Practices Act, so that we could maybe get some protection for some of those other smaller streams that don't have the same amount of protection now. So that was one of the things we were looking at there. Did you have any other things? Did you have any other things, Connie, that you wanted to pull out or look at, or if Susanna or Carol had anything?
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Under policy 3, I like the wording on the left. Yes, from protection from potential adverse effects, but on the right, under staff recommendations, it just brings it back into alignment with the Forest Practices Act, which is on the prior discussion of those setbacks as aspirational. I would like that in there, though, than just the alignment. I mean, protection where the Forest Practices Act has more setbacks than is in county code is good, but not just to leave it at that. But just have the aspirational language in there.
Okay, so you're talking about
we could increase protection. Is that what you're saying, Susanna? That we could go beyond the Forest Practices Act if we so desired, moving forward?
Well,
Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, if it ever comes possible, this is what we would like.
Okay, so that's sort of in line with where you were before with some of that language that we were talking about there, with the aspirational language that Gail had filled in toward the end. So that actually lines up pretty much with what we were talking about with goal 3. The need to review and strengthen and incorporate the Forest Practices Act, stream back setbacks into the buffers into the county code. So that kind of works with what the staff recommendation is. So it sounds like we might have that covered. We might need to refine that language a little bit and then bring something back to you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the other goals and policies, and they're really, unless you have something that you'd like to pull out in through policies, 4 through 12, maybe we could take a look at the Seaside Rural Community Plan. Was there anything in 4 through 12, or do you want to go ahead and take a look at the Seaside Rural Community Plan?
I know that we've got a limited time. Now, if now that I feel like I'm, I'm learning to read this a little bit better, but if I find something that of concern back in one of the ones that we're kind of moving past right now, can I bring it up again, or is there
Oh, yeah.
only a one-time visit on some of this stuff?
You can bring it up again, or you can bring it up at a next meeting. You could bring it up down the road. You can send me an email. Absolutely.
Okay, because we're working on this for 2 years, right? And
We're working on it, yeah, for possibly for the rest of my natural life. I'm not sure, but it could be a while. Yeah, I had hoped to be through goal 5 before I retired, but I'm starting to wonder about that. Anyway, yes, you can bring it up. We can revisit it. We will revisit it as we need to. But I do
okay,
think that unless you've got something specific that you're worried about now, and you're getting more familiar with how we're doing this, unless you have something specific now, anything that you'd like to bring forward at the next meeting or another meeting, we're not going to be through with this for a while. We are coming back to this.
okay,
Email
sounds
me,
great.
fine. Call me, that's fine too.
Perfect. Let's look at Seaside Rural though, then, unless Susanna has another specific concern.
Well, I think it's under Seaside Rural, under mining, and staff recommendations is, yes, mining is controlled by Oregon Department of Geology Minerals, but it, like Forest Practices Act, is developed by big mining interests, and it's, to apply what Dogami has for their recommendations would destroy a lot of salmonberry, anyway, you know what I mean, streams. And I would love some aspirational language in there too. Knowing that Dogami does control mining.
Susanna, are you looking at policy 2 under Seaside Rural? It says mining, dredging, or removal of gravel or similar materials from streams and other surface water shall be strictly controlled to prevent adverse alteration to flow characteristics, siltation and pollution, and destruction or disruption of spawning areas?
Yes, that part I like. It's the staff recommendation kind of deferring to Dogami, which kind of makes your policy irrelevant. But I like the policy. If the wording will be your policy, I like that.
Okay, so the
Policy.
staff recommendation pointed out that riparian setbacks apply in all zones, and we have a standard there for S 4.500, as do DSL, that's Department of State Lands requirements regarding streambed alteration. In addition, mining is controlled by the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, and I probably should have added in there, and I failed to, and I apologize. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, has very, very rigid controls over mining sluice and runoff as well. So what they require, all of these agencies together require settling ponds and that where the sediment settles out before water can re-enter the rivers. It's fairly complex. The sections of code regarding this uh, they go for pages and pages. So we don't, the county doesn't actually have a lot of jurisdiction in this area. These state agencies do. So, I mean, to have a policy that's aspirational about let's probably, it's whatever you'd like to say, but do know that DEQ and DSL and the whole alphabet soup of state and federal agencies
No,
are all over mining.
And I'm frustrated because a neighbor in Jewell did something really illegal, and he's not gonna have anything happen.
Mm.
And he's a cop, so he's kind of on the inside track probably. It's frustrating. I
Well,
talked
and
again about it.
right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Susanna, but I wanted to just say that, for example, in fact, I used them when I built my house. The company that supplies rock, various kinds of rock and everything that's there just when you turn on to 101 from 26, and it used to be owned by a family, and now it's like a corporate business. And and it just, I'm not saying that they're doing anything bad. It just reminds me that we've got corporate money there that can push for certain kinds of advantages. And so
Well,
I'm going to chime in with Susanna's concern for making sure that we're on top of this.
Sure. So I see that Gail has added some language, and so that's up on your screen now, and she put it in, and she's just highlighted it. So after need to review and strengthen the Forest Practices Act is same for Dogami and mining regulations. So are we comfortable with adding that language, or letting staff devise some language that you can look at?
yes, I mean, why don't you work on it? Because as you say, we will go over these and more in the
Oh, yeah.
future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just one thing for Connie about gravel. I don't know. I think all gravel now in the county is from the rock outcroppings where they take big solid rock and blast it and make little rock, and that's our gravel. They don't take it, I don't think, at all from stream beds anymore.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think again, it's like I said, I wasn't sure that there was really anything specific to be concerned about with that particular company. It's just, it's a corporation, it's not a family owned business at this point. And so it just kind of was a little bit of a flag for me. I'm not even going to call it a red flag, to just say, hey, there's no more money there, and of course they're going to look after their own interest over time.
Are you talking about the Big River company that,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. They are locally owned, but yeah, they are a larger
Oh, they
company.
are. Okay, because I noticed they had, I wasn't sure, and thank you for clarifying that, because I know they also purchased the, they've got one over there along the Highway 30 as well,
Yeah.
with the same names.
Well, and some of these
I,
companies are, they're fairly good sized and they're regional. But I mean, we know who these folks are, but it doesn't mean that down the road they
okay,
won't sell to a larger company. That can always happen. But
right,
just,
right.
you know,
Just trying to,
just
kind of be in a preventative mode. So, thank you.
you're welcome. So, was there anything else under the Seaside Rural section that anybody looked at or wanted to comment on, or?
Let's see. Let's see. Could you scroll down to policy 4 so I can? Yeah. Okay. And 5. Right. Could you remind me what OPR is for the Jewell Wildlife Meadows?
Open space, park, and recreation.
Okay, okay. So, and that, and when I think of park and recreation, then I think of, now I know people will stop by there and they'll view the elk and that kind of thing, but I didn't really keep track of whether there's like a fence around that. It seems like there may be some fencing along the 202 there. But I guess I'm just kind of wondering if there's, since we're calling it, it's a wildlife refuge, what kinds of interactions or activities can humans have in that location besides
Well,
viewing?
mostly it's viewing and photography. I think the state has a program where you can sign up, and I think it's like years out ahead of time. You can sign up to feed the elk during the winter. There's a feed the elk program. I don't have any
Okay.
idea how much it costs or anything like that, but uh, basically that preserve, the animals come and go as the animals choose. There are areas
Mhm.
where the signage basically tells you this is where humans can be, and you're not supposed to go out and walk amongst them. So you can be in the
Okay.
parking area and the viewing areas, and there's some interpretive signage. But other than that, anything that anything out of that area is going to be under the control of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff in terms of like doing any work, like, you know, working on a culvert for a stream that's back in there or anything like that. It's completely going to be supervised by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. If you go on there's a bird banding program from there. Again, staff is always with the people who are doing the bird banding. I think that's actually through Jewell School. Actually, I think that's part of that program. So
Oh,
yeah, it's but nothing, to the best of my knowledge, nothing is fenced unless it's to keep the people in the parking lot. And I think they use more of a vegetative buffer type thing, kind of
oh, that might
raised
be what
hedge
I
style.
when I'm
Yeah, and
viewing.
it's just
Yeah, when I
mostly to
go
keep
and try
people
to.
back.
Yeah. Well, that's what, as you've described it, that's what I've observed over the years. I think I was just wanting to make sure that there wasn't something else that that was available there that I wasn't necessarily observing. So that um, that's okay for me. Susanna, did you have any concerns? I was actually wanting to go back up to, I think, policy one. Is that the development, the housing development piece, residential development? Okay.
Well, I can comment on that. I mean, already a lot of that out, other than along 101, I mean, the Clatsop Plains is um, RA5, right? And that's, to me, fairly low density if you're going to have some places to develop for the county to grow into. And I just don't think that it makes any difference. I mean, those big animals, they love to go into your gardens and yards. I mean, it's perfect. It's part of the trouble in Warrenton.
Ah,
The herds, just as people say, they don't want to go out with their dogs to let the dog go outside to go pee. Because if the herd of elk is in your yard, the elk don't like any canines, right? They can go after your dog. It is a big problem for that part of the world, but I don't think lower density housing is any way to resolve it myself. And good luck for Warrenton, who knows? Because I used to
yeah.
work there, and those big herds, when they go cruising on through, the elk are pretty intense. The deer are a pain in the butt for eating up your garden, but they're not dangerous like the herds of elk are. And I don't mean
Susan,
hitting them in cars, which is really bad, as you know, Connie, but yeah.
yeah.
But good luck on
Well,
figuring that one
yeah,
out.
you brought up a good point because just reminded me I was working, I had worked for Lutheran Community Services Northwest for a while, and I drove up this one neighborhood street on the um, kind of in that back side of Warrenton, and the elk, there must have been 10, 15 elk just sitting around in somebody's yard. I mean, it was just, they were completely occupying the entire yard. And like you're saying, Susanna, I mean, I certainly wouldn't have I wouldn't take my dog out in that. I had kind of forgotten about it. I thought, oh, this looks cute, but yeah, they're big animals. It can be a dangerous situation. And that was just in a neighborhood, you know, of, uh, you know, of where the houses were more, like city lots, and they were just in there.
Oh, yes. I mean, to me, in the best of all worlds, the big industrial timberlands, they could have really nice wood and more browse, but for the big animals, but the way they plant so closely together, once the trees grow up out of that, there's very little browse in those really dense industrial tree plantations. And I think that might be why there's a lot more elk and deer in the coastal areas, because I think their natural forest stuff isn't natural anymore. It's industrial tree plantations. But, that's out of everybody's hands, and we have great gardens for all the elk.
So are you wanting to ditch policy 1, or did you want to retain it or do something to it?
Well, I think there should be a county-wide thing to help people with fencing, but not that there's any money out there, especially nowadays. So I don't know. I mean, to me, if you want to garden, you have to fence. I think that no matter what happens, I think it would be nice if the county could study with these communities how to fence your areas to protect them. But I know
Yeah,
I worried once leaving
Go ahead.
Warrenton, some kid was walking home from school and there were a big herd of elk and he was approaching a yard, and it's kids walking home from school. It's all kind of tricky with that elk problems. And I was at Camp Rylea trying to find some place, and the elk were all over the Camp Rylea road, and I lost my turn. I was able to get back to it. The elk have a big attitude on Camp Rylea, and I think all the soldiers really love them. And they have
Well,
more of an attitude, I think, probably than in the Jewell area where humans represent being hunted. And I think elk have more respect around Jewell than in Camp Riley.
yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that like the elk that was there, he was just staring at me when I hit him. So I hadn't thought about that, Susanna. But you bring up a good point with the person. I think if we're going to allow housing, I mean, like the neighborhood I was describing, I mean, if we're going to, officially provide neighborhoods, then I think the neighborhoods need to be protected. I mean, if we're going to zone it and allow a neighborhood, then I think the neighborhoods, I think people don't realize that elk can be as dangerous as maybe in a different way, but everybody thinks about cougars and they think about wolves, but elk can be dangerous as well. In fact, last time I was in Yellowstone, they said the bison are more dangerous than the bears. So, Suzanne, I bring up a good point, and and I think having, there's going to be places in the county where we're zoned more densely for housing, and I think it doesn't really. I don't think you get more protection whether you have 5 acres or you have, a 50 by 100 lot.
Right. Perhaps the county could do maybe more outreach education. I don't really know. Just
Yeah, I noticed that that's what's being typed here.
That would be Gail, who probably could chime in and talk a little bit based on what she's been doing with the Clatsop Plains and the Elk group.
Yeah, so part of this Oregon Solutions Clatsop Plains project is we're tasked with creating a whole bunch of strategies and tools that all the communities can use to address and minimize these conflicts. So, you know, I was part of the human behavior and part of the land use subcommittees. And one of the things that was stressed over and over is, first of all, the need to educate residents, school children, visitors, especially about what is proper elk etiquette and why elk do what they do and when do they do it. So for example, during calving and rutting season, you really want to stay away from the elk. But visitors don't think about that, or you know, even residents. You shouldn't feed the elk. You shouldn't be leaving apples out for them or even trying to hand feed them. We have created some recommendations about fencing and to make sure that our codes allow those types of fencing, because a lot of times, especially in the incorporated areas, there's height limits on how tall a fence can be. So making sure that our codes allow the fencing and then educating people about what's the best type of fencing. Same thing with landscaping and making sure that we are educating people and letting them know here are plants that elk are not particularly partial to, as opposed to the things that they love to come and snack on. So those will be some of the recommendations that will be incorporated into that declaration of cooperation. And what I would suggest that you might want to do is incorporate those recommendations then as policies into our comp plan. So, and that would reinforce supporting the education and the fencing and the landscaping options.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. It's I think, you know, like for example, if I'm a person looking to buy a house or rent a house in Warrenton, I think it's important to know ahead of time, what some of the issues that need to be, thought about. And because like, my example of the elk all over, I hadn't even thought about it. I was just driving in my car, but that, I'm sure that if I had been that, the owner or renter of that house, I would have been calling the county saying, I can't leave my house, that type of thing.
Well, so Gail has added then probably what is going to be your recommendation to also include education notice language for persons purchasing properties in big game habitat, which is an awful lot of the county. The vast majority of this county is considered big game habitat. So it looks like that recommendation probably fulfills your
Okay.
requirements. Oh, and she's going to turn on the big game habitat for you so you can see it. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, the
Okay.
darker
Wow.
brown is big game habitat. The light color, the light screen, is peripheral big game habitat. As you can see,
Okay.
we are big game habitat. That's and
Yeah.
the Elsie-Jewell and Seaside rural areas are big game habitat or peripheral. You're all entirely game habitat.
Right.
So I was looking to see if we had anything further, if you're comfortable with that recommendation, if you had anything further in the Seaside Rural Plan that you wanted to look at, or if you wanted to take a look at the lonely little Elsie-Jewell Community Wildlife Policy down there. Mindful that we still would like to get in comments from the public, if there's anything more to be said from the public, and also selecting your next meeting date.
Okay.
Well, I do have just one comment on I lost the wording on the notification for like realtors, but also rental, short and long term? Okay. For not just purchasing, but also for short and long term rentals? That, yeah, somehow that
Thank you,
gets in there.
Susan.
So for rental policies, we could probably slip that in on the short-term rental policies too.
Yeah,
Oh,
because
totally.
I,
The short term. Yeah. People coming
yeah,
in Airbnb with their dogs
yeah.
would have no idea.
Yeah. Okay, so if
Well,
you're
and
comfortable with that
purchasing
language,
to have kids, you know, the yard I looked at wasn't that far from the Warrenton grade school. You know, I mean, it would have been, you know, part of Warrenton. And so, you know, just somebody purchasing or renting a house, you know, with a family, you know, they're going to want to know that their family is safe.
sure.
Oh, the other comment just to have in there, because I'm pleased with my thought about motion sensor something and that could somehow pick up an elk herd moving and then have lights flashing on 101 or something. I don't
Oh,
know if it could be.
I think Gail put something in there already, farther,
Okay.
maybe on the other
Okay.
policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Safety measures for traffic and elk interaction, especially on Highway 101.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but something like that. I saw Gail flash her hand up. Maybe she has something to add.
Yeah, I do. So the Elk Committee, as I like to call them, has looked at the very thing that you talked about, Susanna, with the flashing lights and some sort of trigger mechanism, so that as elk were getting ready to cross Highway 101, that there would be some sort of warning to drivers. The committees eventually discarded that idea for several reasons. Part of it was the need to loop ODOT into the loop or into the project. Cost was a really big factor. A lot of times those types of sensors aren't really effective because you have to make sure that the elk are crossing in a place where you've put the sensors, and it's very hard to control them and teach them how to use a crosswalk.
Yes.
The better solution, but much more expensive, are the underpasses, where you can actually, you know, funnel the elk through an underpass under a highway. But it's extremely expensive. You're talking probably $100 million.
And one trouble that ODOT has, they don't want the traffic flow to be slowed down. It's been a big issue on Highway 26 at Elderberry Inn. We have been begging for reduced speed through there for years, and ODOT doesn't want to reduce speed. And one of the reasons is they want to maintain traffic flow and velocity. They don't want anybody, you know, slowing down the movement. It's very frustrating sometimes. Not enough people have died there in front of Elderberry Inn. A lot of people have been hit and injured severely, but not too many deaths. So it's frustrating with
Well, I
ODOT.
understand your frustration because I use the Highway 103 intersection a lot. And luckily, you know, my schedule is such that I'm usually not using it to get back onto Highway 26, you know, like in the middle of a Saturday, for example. But that I'm not sure. I would think, since I haven't had to do that, but I'm thinking I almost would end up having to make a right turn, go up the road a ways, and then maybe double back to get back to, you know, going west to my house, because there's just, you know, there's no regulation there at all.
Right.
They are big and wild and woolly and full of fleas. I'm absolutely sure of it. So I'm looking at the schedule here and just want to loop us back in, if at all possible. did you want to take a look at that Elsie-Jewell a little bit, or do you want to move back to public comment and input before? And I really would like you to select your next meeting date before we close.
Can I just, on the meeting date,
to
that,
look at the other area that you that you're wanting us to look at? I mean, should we maybe just take a moment to look at it? Just
Absolutely.
so maybe we might not be able to cover it thoroughly, but at least then we kind of know where we're headed next.
Well, sure, absolutely. The Elsie-Jewell one really just focuses on wildlife refuges. And so you've got the Jewell Wildlife Meadow in your planning area. The Lewis and Clark Wildlife Refuge is in the northeast planning area. There's the Saddle Mountain State Park Natural Area, which is in the Elsie-Jewell area. We only have one zone that actually permits wildlife refuge or management, and it's in the OPR zone. Let's see. And the use is a type 1, it's not a type 4. So we kind of have some outdated language in here, I think, but let's see, let me look down there. So if there was anything in there that you wanted to pull out, staff didn't really make any recommendations there. Alternative lands and management actions available to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, an analysis of why those alternatives or management actions will not resolve identified problems or achieve objectives, and identification for the need of proposed new wildlife management areas. So basically, if we were going to be ODFW wanting to create a new management area, they have to do an ESE analysis, ECS, I can't remember how to say it. ESE, I think, economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences, an analysis for that. And these are the types of findings that they have to provide. We've got, I mean, other than the fact that in the OPR zone, it's a type 1 rather than a type 4 procedure. If there's anything in there that concerns you, please let me know. But and you can take time to look at that and maybe fire an email off to me if you would prefer.
Yeah, I would say, because I mean, it looks like I need to do some additional self-education here, because it's like I'm thinking, okay, type 1, type 4.
Well, let me tell you what that means.
Okay.
A type 1 application is basically over the counter. You come in, you apply for it. We just make sure that you have everything you need. It's like it's no more difficult than building a single family dwelling in a zone that permits a single family dwelling. But if it's a type 4 application, it requires a great deal more, and probably is going to need to be heard at the Planning Commission level as well as the Board of County Commissioners level. It's a much more involved process. It involves public notice and hearings. But if it's type 1, it really doesn't require that level of oversight. It's administrative. Staff can look at it, make sure it checks all the correct boxes, and approve it. So that's what the difference there is in terms of the type 1 and the type 4 procedure.
Okay, and so right now we're directed by type 1 mostly. Is that
right now? Yeah, it's the only zone that permits it is OPR, where it is a type 1 procedure. Staff, it's administrative. Staff just checks, make sure that they have everything they need, and we don't actually have wildlife refuges in as a permitted use in another zone.
Right. Well, I think the thing that comes to mind for me, I mean, I'm in favor of as much wildlife refuge as possible, but just given my observances with rural residents, other rural residences. I'm actually kind of a transplant from Portland. I'm kind of wondering if a type 4 wouldn't help educate and bind other other residents in the county together, to everybody to understand and support additional wildlife areas by having hearings and that kind of thing.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
Okay. I think in reality, Connie, in the immediate Nehalem River area, there are three big ones. The Saddle Mountain unit, I don't know how many acres they are, but the Jewell, I don't really know acreage. The Jewell area is maybe along Highway 202 is at least 100 acres, maybe.
Mhm.
And then there's the Beneke Creek, which is maybe 100 acres or more. I don't know how big they are. But they're big. And I wouldn't think along there they would need a new wildlife management area for our Zone 5. Has there been talk about from Department of ODFW about wanting more wildlife management areas?
I'm not aware of anything coming to the county. I mean, the most recent thing was an attempt to put in a boat ramp on the Klatskanine, and that was just a boat ramp. It didn't actually end up being something that they could do. It was approved conditionally by the Planning Commission, but there turned out to be a problem with an easement for the diking district that was insurmountable for them, so they didn't end up putting the end. That's the most recent thing that I can think of, and certainly that's not a wildlife management area. So no, we really haven't had any discussion about that with anyone from ODFW or U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
And I think that, the only problem with game movement in the Jewell area is there definitely areas of migration, and Highway 103 is the main road that crosses all of that, where you can go fast enough that you could get into trouble. And the worst trouble is when there's fog and stuff, it makes it really difficult.
Sure.
But I don't know. The people out there seem to be pretty aware of wildlife. I don't know of people hitting them too much. And
I became self-educated. That's why
I mean,
it makes it
but sometimes
I go 35 miles an hour in that area at night.
yeah, I mean it's tricky, as I say, this time of year when they're breeding and hormonal, and for the deer when they bring their fawns out in the early fall, and the fawns are, either they get hit and die or they get smart. But the rest of the year, the deer can be all along the road and rarely walk across, except for this time of year when also the deer are breeding and get hormonal and a little distracted.
Yeah.
But the one thing I do want to comment on for the Nehalem River, well, for all waterway development which is all over the county, is when people have a lot, and in Jewell, a lot of them are on waterways. When they have a lot, they want to manicure it right down to the water. And which can also put chemicals and things on the water. And I don't know if there's anything to be done about that, but it's an issue. And I know with all the FEMA stuff, I think there's been a whole lot more after the floods, because there was also the 07, the December 07 storm, 2007.
That I was
Mhm.
in. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There was the 96 flood, which was
Yeah. I experienced both of them.
yeah, the 96 flood, and most of the mid Nehalem was far worse than the '07 flood. There were some log jams near Vernonia that backed up, and so the Vernonia area got hit as bad or worse in the '07 floods. But yeah, it was the 96 floods that were really bad. along the Nehalem.
Right. Well, so the setbacks are supposed to have to do with buffering the streams and rivers and waterways from sedimentation and chemical runoff. So people really probably are not supposed to manicure all the way down to the stream bank, and that probably is going to be considered a violation. People don't get turned in for that, and also because there is so much going on in the county, there's really code compliance has plenty to do without going out and looking at every single yard to see if somebody's mowing too close. We don't have the resources to police that. If somebody complained about it, then we would definitely look at it on a case-by-case basis. But you know, mostly we rely on people to do the right thing an
Yeah.
awful lot of the time. I'm going to point out that you're over your time, and we probably want to make sure that we have all the public input from both Susanna and Carol, and then set that next meeting date unless you want to give it some thought and then email me. And if you have anything else on any of these, including this one that we were just discussing, please feel free to email me. And I'll put my
Yeah,
email address in the box here.
right. Yeah, we ran out of time, but I definitely still, I think wanted to wrestle with the 1 and 4 thing. Here's my, now I don't want to overstep the public comment. Should we open up for that first and then talk about the next meeting date?
Certainly.
Okay, so here's the opportunity. Carol, we haven't heard from you again. It's quite, we're always looking for guests that have some things they'd like to contribute, so don't hesitate. And Susanna, if you have anything else to add to all your wonderful contributions, go for it.
But have we heard from Carol yet?
No.
No, and both of you feel free to email me. That's fine too.
Okay.
My email is in the chat box.
So is Carol, I do have a question if Carol isn't wanting to comment. But I've talked so much.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Go for it, Susanna. I was gonna look in the chat.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
look in the chat.
I was just gonna see if she had anything that she. I haven't seen anything new from Carol. Go for it.
Okay. Oh, there was one thing well, when is the vote from the county commissioners on the new applications for these committees? And
It'll be going to the board on December 9th.
okay. And just my comment on meetings is it was kind of intense to have yesterday's meeting of the countywide and then this meeting. I would like to see them a little more separated.
Well, we did separate them because this meeting was immediately following the countywide meeting. So
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
No, that would have made my poor brain fall over dead. So
That's okay. Last week on the 12th, we had the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee at 10. We had the Clatsop Plains Advisory Committee at 1. And then we had another meeting at 2. And I can't remember something else at 10 the following day. So sometimes Gail in particular has like 3 of these in a day. So we do understand your concern about the intensity of these right on top of each other. We are fully alive to that problem. But anyway, in the meantime, did you want to talk about December? December is a full month in so many ways.
well, for myself personally, well, I am now, I don't know if the soil and water, I'm going to be on the Soil and Water Conservation District, but I don't know when their meetings are, and I'm not doing other meetings, so I'm wide open.
And
Connie,
Julia,
oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry,
I'm sorry.
Julia. So I know at the last meeting, Connie, you and Pam had talked about keeping the meeting at this date and time because it seemed to work well for both of you. So that would make it the third Friday of the month.
Third Friday. Actually, a Friday would be better, you know, because I'm less likely to have my partner. Oftentimes, I think it would have been a conflict. He has to go in for doctor appointments at about this time of the month quarterly. So having it on a Friday though makes you know, takes the conflict away. And so you know, so that works fine for me to do this. I like having, I have far less conflicts on a Friday.
If you were to go with the third Friday of the month in December, that would be the 18th. So the week before Christmas. So that kind of gets you out of conflict with the Christmas holiday as well. Does December 18th sound okay with you?
Yeah.
Susanna, how do you feel about that?
Yes.
You like that?
Like Thanksgiving, I don't know if I'm doing anything Christmas, but staying home.
Yeah, that's kind of the year for it, isn't it? And so anyway, if Carol has an opinion, I'd be happy to accept that. Do you want to just go ahead and set December 18th at 10 a.m., Friday, December 18th at 10 a.m. for the next meeting? And by then we'll have the new committee members and we'll be getting them on board as well.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, that's exciting. I'm glad that I wasn't sure where that process was at. So thank you for bringing up that question, Susanna. My only concern is Pam. You know, I've been trying to be flexible for her. But you know, I think that she had originally helped select this day. So you know, you know, as because you know, she's usually been really you know, tried to be at each meeting. So you know, I would, if there was some kind of major conflict for her, then I would want to accommodate that. But
Sure.
otherwise, I like this.
And she likes the 10 a.m.?
Originally that was what she had requested.
Okay.
Okay. So maybe this will fit for her, you know, if I think where I was going with that, since this was kind of what we had set up before.
Okay, so why don't I go ahead and schedule that, and I'll also get it out to Pam and see that if it fits with her. So let's go with December 18th at 10 a.m. If we need to reschedule, then I will let you know, but otherwise, why don't you go ahead and book Friday, December 18th at 10 a.m. Okay?
Okay.
All righty.
Sounds good.
Well, that I think gets you to the end of your agenda, and you're only about 13 minutes over, so I congratulate you on that. Not everybody was able to make this kind of a deadline. This is a big section of code here. So anyway, I thank you both, and that gets you through. So Connie, if you're ready, you are welcome to adjourn the meeting.
Okay. Now what I'm trying to remember is if I need a, well, I'm the only official member here, right? So I can just call for an adjournment.
That's right.
We don't need a vote. Okay. All right. So unless there's any further concerns, I'm adjourning this meeting.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Yes.